Hey, how are you? And welcome to the For Real podcast, a series of conversations with colleagues and friends from the world of radio, audio and communications who I admire and respect and who have helped, supported and inspired me and many others over the years. They will share great stories, insight and learning to help you find your real voice, your authentic self and the confidence to own it. Before we get going, I want to thank my producer Alex Healy and my mates here at Distorted for hosting me in their fantastic studios in Leeds. Finally, there might be the odd effing and jeffing, but after all, this is For Real. Hey, how are you? I really hope all is good. Here we are for episode 8 of For Real. Now, the eagle-eared amongst you will no doubt be wondering what happened to episode 7. Well, the wonderful Sophia Can joined me for a chat a few weeks ago, and during our conversation we touched on a nightmare she's been experiencing this year. At this stage I can't say too much other than Sophia has been the victim of some horrific bullying and threatening behaviour, which is belatedly the subject of a criminal investigation, and therefore we can't publish episode 7 at this time. The most important thing is for Sophia to get some closure and her hideous experience to come to an end, and we all send here our love and support to her. We will look to publish this very real conversation as soon as we can legally do so. This episode of For Real is with the brilliant and lovely human Joshua Harris, or to use his professional moniker, Jay. Jay is the founder, MD and lead creative strategist at Disruptive Talent Group, and for the best part of 20 years he's been coaching and developing presenting talent for some of the world's leading media brands, including the BBC, ITV, Global Media and Entertainment, Bauer Media, YouTube and Twitch, to name a few. Now, Jay and I go back a long way, and I've had the enormous privilege of working with him and seeing firsthand how brilliant he is with people and bringing out the best in those around him. Jay helps people be real and relatable in their communication and develop hugely successful careers. However, he's so much more than that. Jay builds belief and confidence in those who come into his world, me included, and that is a priceless gift to share with anyone. If the world had more Jays around, it would be a far nicer and happier place. Hey Jay, how are you, my friend?
It's quite moving. It's quite moving, to be honest, to hear that. Thank you so much for such a humbling introduction. You just go through life trying to be a positive influence, right? Trying to elevate the people who are in your circle. You know, you're trying to identify people who are having a tough time, and be the person that you hope is going to be around for you when those tough times go full circle. So appreciate it. And listen, I would not be the guy I am now without your influence in my past. So it's very much reciprocated energy. So thank you so much for having me on in this podcast I'm a fan of. So yeah, it's a blessing.
And I meant every word, as you know. This is For Real. So let's talk a little bit about Disruptive Talent and how and why it came about.
So if you hadn't already noticed, and for those who haven't seen the visuals, I'm a white man. And I think the industry for a long time was dominated by white males. I think there still is a bit of a hangover in terms of an outdated white male approach. And of course, there's people who are progressive within that. So that's not me kind of tainting everyone with the same brush. But I believe that talent is universal. Talent doesn't have a prefix. And my experiences in the industry for 20 years across various platforms and brands was that there was this obsession with what the person represents rather than the talent that they possess. And actually, there's no such thing as a female talent. There's no such thing as an LGBTQ plus talent. There's no such thing as a black talent. Ultimately, it's talent first. And life is about shared human experience. We're on this tiny little island. We have so much more in common than we do different. And I wanted to be in a position where I was really taking diversity and inclusion seriously, not just in terms of lip service, but in terms of actualization, in terms of ensuring that we're leveling the playing field and giving everyone access to the same level of resource, everyone access to elite level coaching, everyone having access to the same level of support and mentorship that, in my opinion, in the past had kind of been reserved for a middle-class white male. And so we set Disruptive up with the idea of increasing that access, opening the door for people who deserve to have the door opened for them. And then it's evolved. It's grown into a production company and private coaching, and we're blessed to be talking to educational institutions about implementing a syllabus there. And you just go where the opportunity and the need is, I guess. So for me, it was I can only influence and impact a certain amount of people. How do I create an infrastructure and a culture and a legacy that's going to be able to live beyond just me?
Respect and all power to you, man. Because if you look at it, I had a great conversation with Ariane Murray a few episodes back.
Amazing woman.
And we were talking about the lack of females in senior executive content roles in UK audio. But when we look at diversity in mainstream UK media, the picture is still not great. The BBC have recently announced a major scaling back of BBC local radio content with potentially devastating consequences for many black radio shows and presenters around the country. What's the problem as you see it?
People get burnt out, I think, is the most simplistic headline. I think a lot of young producers and presenters come through with high aspirations, high ambitions. I want to create content that I love. I want to work alongside platforms and brands that I aspire to, collaborate with. But the way the business has shrunk and the way the business largely has ignored development, it's almost like you have to learn on the job. And once you get sacked once or twice, once you feel undervalued, once you feel like there's too many barriers preventing me from doing what I really want to do here, I think you give up. And what I find fascinating is that although the representation across a lot of brands, and listen, not all, some brands are doing a good job, like they're really trying, you see a lot of creators actually going and creating their own lane, because they no longer are reliant on external validation and endorsement. Instead, they know that they have the access to creating their own community and their own audience. I'm run out of names, but like KSI, Patricia Bright, Munya, Chunks and Philly, like all of these individuals who have come through and they thought, I've normally got a bit of sweary, but I'll try not to swear.
Don't
normally
worry, man.
They're
we're happy with any language on here.
My mum will kill me. Normally they're like, well, look, fuck this brand or this platform is not necessarily going to give me the opportunity. I'll just create a lane myself. And then by the time some of these media platforms find out about the profiles, it's too late and they can't afford them. So I think the problem is in terms of access initially. I think there's still like this, again, like a level of white patriarchy. And I will, as a white man, never fully understand the journey. But if you've ever been in a position where you're the only person who represents you at that party, if you're the only male in an all-female room, or more frequently, if you're the only female in an all-male room, now add the layer of cultural background, heritage, nationality, language, education, socioeconomic background. By the time you add layer upon layer upon layer, you don't want to be in that room. And I think a real barrier of point of entry is that there's not enough people, as Ariane said, there's not enough people who you can clock in the room and be like, cool, they're like me, I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. As a white man, we can never understand or experience the journey that so many of our friends have had to suffer. I mean, I'm a white man. I happen to tan quite easily, and as a child, used to get a lot of racist abuse because of the color of my skin. As a white person, I experienced that because of the color of my skin, which is weird, and ran away from school on one occasion in tears when I was about 7, because of it all. And I had that throughout my teenage years as well. But it's not even anything remote like so many people have experienced. So that's the only kind of way I can relate to it in my own small way, and it's horrendous. And I mean, we talk about our friends and our colleagues' journeys. In your personal journey, to the heights that you're at now and some of the achievements that you've done, has life always been plain sailing for you?
No way. Firstly, bless you for the accolade, but we're nowhere near the heights and legacy that we want to reach yet. But I'm not focused on what we're not doing. I'm focused on what we are doing. So firstly, I would say, yeah, there's relatively speaking, I'm blessed in terms of what we've achieved. But moving forward, we want to do a lot more. I think, just to touch on a point that you made, I'm really blessed to have married a beautiful, black, powerful African woman, and the nearest I've ever got to feeling like what a black individual must feel in a whitewashed room is being the only white guy in a fully black family. Now, I love that. I embraced it, but I could very quickly see why there's a subconscious level of, oh, this is intimidating, or this is different. Also, as a ginger, pasty white boy of Irish heritage, you get, kids are horrible, eh? They'll pick out any reason to pick on you. And again, that's a drop in the ocean. That was one experience compared to me living that experience every single day for X amount of years. Has it always been plain sailing? It depends how many layers you want me to unpeel. I think raised in an amazing family that loved on me, encouraged me, always kind of told me to be me. Both of my folks were in communication. My dad was a pastor, very, very inspiring communicator. My mum is a speech therapist, so she again every day was in communication. But in terms of other than that, we moved around a lot. I moved 17 times now. When people ask me where I'm from, I don't have an answer really, which is one of the first questions people ask you. Where are you from? And I'm like, well, I currently live in London. Is that okay? To give kind of the small talk British headline, I'm like, well, this is going to take 20 minutes if you really want me to explain. Similar experience to a lot of kids, bullied at school pretty badly. I think people didn't like the way that I was quite confident and spoke. And when people are from situations, where they don't have the loving family at home, inevitably they then want to project that on you and pull you down. In terms of professionally, I've always wanted to be an outlier, but part of being an outlier is embracing and absorbing people's experience in terms of the existing structures. Really blessed to have worked alongside and for some amazing individuals in the media who I still have great relationships with. But then when you're wanting to live beyond the task that you're assigned, that rubs people up the wrong way. And it was inevitable that I was blessed to have an owner mentality rather than employee. And so to get to a point where we've launched a business pre-pandemic, 2 months before the pandemic, heading into a recession, yes, it's not been easy, but trauma is relative, right? And then in terms of my own mental health journeys, in terms of wrapped around identity and purpose and passion, that's been quite a rocky road, especially in the last sort of 5-6 years. So there you go. There's the initial layers. Feel free to probe any more that you want. I'm trying not to cry in the first 7 minutes of your episode, but inevitably we'll get there at some point.
I mean, you touched on there about moving 17 times, etc. And my father was in the Air Force, and subsequently, when I kind of got my act together in my late teens, I joined the forces too. So I've moved around, not quite as many. It's 12 for me. But that kind of journey meant I always felt, particularly at school, with so many different schools, I always felt like an outsider. Never quite fitted in. 2 or 3 years, as soon as you kind of settled in, I was moving around. And so I always kind of felt a little bit like that, which meant I don't really have that sense of identity similar to what you were talking about in terms of where you're from. I mean, I was born in Gibraltar, and then I've moved so many times, I'm not really sure. So I can relate to that. But you talked about it as well, when you talk about some of the talent that you work with, if they've been sacked a couple of times, our industry has gone through so much consolidation and change. and you've experienced that as well. How did you develop the kind of resilience to cope with that, or did you, or did it affect you?
Hindsight's 2020, isn't it? So in terms of retrospectively, I look back and I'm like, okay, that was the real making of me. I think one of the things of moving is that you get real resilience. And I look back at moving now really fondly because it's given me core skills which you just can't pick up in an institution, in terms of being able to establish rapport and being resilient and identifying opportunity and creating finance. But in terms of my own professional experience at the time, it was horrible, and I went into it like a lot of the creatives that I work with, blindly naive, believing that everyone else gives as much of a shit about my talent and dreams as I do, which no one ever does. In terms of the bottom line for any business, and I see this more now than ever owning my own, is that margins play such a huge part, and anything that jeopardizes finances could be seen as high risk. And if you're a sensible business owner wanting to create long-term success, you reduce high risk. So going through it and losing my first job, 21, I believe I was. And it was really interesting, that job, because I talked my way in, being blessed with the ability that I do and having the creative eye that I believe I have. But then it's very representative of what the industry does. Brings in young, energetic, enthusiastic individuals, gives them the keys to a Ferrari when they've just learned they're driving, they've just learned how to drive, and then being surprised when they crash it. And that happened, not being in a position where I had protected myself, where I'd miscommunicated, where I'd not run due diligence. I don't blame the platform for getting rid of me now. At the time, it was devastating because I had my own flat, I was living big, had a Vespa scooter, I was loving life. I was a very poor man's version of David Beckham in my own mind, and had the world at my feet. And then it came crashing down, and 2 weeks later I was working in retail, and a staff member who I'd once worked alongside came in and asked me for a discount. For me, that's a very humbling experience. Then when industries get smaller and you look at furlough and you look at redundancies, I've come to realize that this is never a personal thing. This is a business thing. And, I call myself Joshua or Jay, depending on at what point in my life you've known me. But realistically speaking, I'm just a number performing a task at a business. And that sounds brutal. And occasionally you'll find businesses who look beyond that. But as I touched on at the beginning, ultimately I'm there to perform a task, and the task is more important than the person. And the minute you then drop the ball on the task, you give them the option of getting rid of you. So I think the long-winded answer is it's definitely been the making of me, and I embrace those because it means now when I'm working with such a young emerging talent, I'm able to warn them of it. I'm never going to be able to prevent them from getting in that situation, but be able to be more aware and more mindful of your decisions and your actions and your relationships. And a lot of people wear their heart on the sleeve, and actually it's like, just hold that a little bit closer. So now it's been great, but at the time, wild.
I mean, I'm interested on that point that you said. I've not looked at it like that. And I said in my introduction how you inspire confidence, belief in those around you. But the way that you've looked at your experience of moving around so often, and the challenges that brought, but then the positives and the skill set that's given you is amazing. I'd never thought about that. And I suppose reflecting on what you just said there, it's kind of, actually, that was me. That what we are the product of our experiences, and that's what's happened. And so again, thank you for pointing out something that's maybe the blindingly obvious, or should have been the blindingly obvious.
I'm not sure about that,
but it wasn't. And for you are being so wonderfully kind again there, because for you that's listening, the listener, what Jay is not telling you is that situation he described about losing his first job when he got the keys to the Ferrari, is that the person sat in the room with him telling me it had to come to an end was me.
Yeah.
And it was one of the hardest days for me, because I'm sat there as part representing a organisation that had made the decision and having to communicate it when I didn't agree with it. And I left the room in bits. It was one of the worst days ever. And yet, you and I have remained friends.
No, always. And it's not, I've come to realize, and that's why I was so adamant that I was an owner rather than an employee, because it's the owners who get to determine culture. The minute you're an employee for anyone, you're ultimately implementing someone else's game plan. So I don't hold anyone responsible for that relative trauma who was in the room. It was above them. And I put you in a position financially where I was high risk, you know, regardless of what my level of involvement was in that was almost irrelevant. It was I gave you the opportunity to solve a problem on paper, but it wasn't you. It wasn't an emotional response from you.
Yeah.
Like, I never hold you responsible. It was my responsibility. And sooner or later, I think growing up and maturing, and I know I'm just, a 38-year-old version of myself now, and in 10 years, 20 years time, I'll probably look back and just laugh at me like, wow, you were immature and naive now. But speaking as a 38-year-old now, I'm like, well, you can only blame the environment and your past and other people for so long. Sooner or later, you need to hold yourself to account. You need to take responsibility for your decisions. And there's two ways that that's going to work out. You're going to win or you're going to learn. So for me, I look back at that and think, wow, I needed that. Because I was 21, I was walking around with this bleach blonde hair with Swarovski crystals in my ears, thinking I'd made it. And the reality is I hadn't done anything.
You look cool on that scooter, man.
Bless you. The insurance wouldn't say so, but yeah, like I loved it. And actually, you know, that was a part of the humbling journey it's been for me. So I don't hold anyone responsible. And for me, it's always character over credentials. People can tell me they're one thing all day long. You can show someone your credentials on paper, but your character shows itself over a period of time.
Yeah.
Character over credentials all day long. And then if you have both, it's a wrap.
Bless you. You've inspired me so many. Like, I look at your Instagram feed and the work that you do on there. I say work, you just sharing who you are and helping and inspiring people. When I started this journey, I've been open about my kind of struggles over the years with mental health, etc., depression, anxiety. Despite all the resilience that you built up over those years, and you can look back on that moving things, you touched a little bit before that you've had your challenges with that. How did you manage that, or did you cope?
My wife kept me alive. That is as simple as that. So to give you some context, I've always been one of the loudest in the room, or I've always been the guy who kind of likes a level of attention up until the last sort of 10 years or so, where I'm like, I actually didn't love it. I had to recalibrate myself, and I realized it was actually a bit of a facade, a bit of a overcompensation. But when you're known as that individual in the room, a lot of people lean into you. And then when a lot of people lean into you and you don't have your own foundations in place, you can fall and you bring the whole thing down. I think in terms of my own mental health journey, you know, it's not widely publicized, but yeah, there's a point where I nearly wasn't here.
Yeah.
And then that forced my hand in terms of therapy, and forced my hand in terms of me having to spend some time in terms of self-reflection. And that all kind of coincided with the real struggles I felt around my own identity and me not fulfilling my passion and purpose. It was, I'm currently making other people rich, and those people don't give a shit about me. And actually it was, I don't want to pursue finance. I want to pursue passion and purpose. And my passion and purpose is championing the underdog, elevating people who don't have opportunity, wanting the community and the industry to experience the richness and the abundance of life that I have, because I'm so surrounded by powerful black men and women, straight, gay, lesbian, people with disabilities, a whole range of incredible cross sections of society that have made me better as an individual, and my life is better as a result of them being in it. So wanting to share that with the rest of the society that I work in and operate in every day was at the forefront I wanted to do of what I wanted to do. So that mental health journey, part of it, when I've unpacked it, obviously it's always multi-thread, was, you know, I'd kind of neglected what I really wanted to achieve and what I felt like I'm on this planet to do, which is to be a go-giver.
You, a powerful story to share, wow. I think
it's wild, isn't it? Because people know me. They're like, wild. When I tell my boys now, I'm like, it's wild. Like, people are like, I never thought you. And I'm like, kings have to look after kings. And I think the beautiful thing, and I'm generalizing now, but the beautiful thing about females is that their communication so often is much more interaction. How are you feeling? What do you think? And we as men take the piss out of it. But, you know, they come around one another and support one another, and they can lean into one another when they're feeling something. And again, I'm generalizing, I'm overly simplifying. But as men, kings don't look after kings. There's always this perception that's like, you're over there trying to do your castle, I'm over here doing my castle. Don't come on my land. Don't interfere. God, there'll be a problem. Whereas the reality is, when one king wins, we all win. When one king wins coming from where I come from, we all win. There's a brother who, I'll name check him, Hamza. There's a brother who I work with at the Beeb, who set his own production company up, and he started winning pitches. And he was so surprised when I went up to him and was like, yes, you doing what you're doing, that's amazing. Any way I can support that, shout. And he's like, but you run a production company. I'm like, yo, like, when you win, I win. Like, we all win as kings. So sorry to interrupt, but I think it's really important that we've got to stop this island mentality. It's got to be much more collaborative, and, you know, how can I support? And, you know, when you and I sit down for breakfast, it's an exchange. It's a, what can I do to help you? Oh, I can do this. What can you do? And not in a way of, I'm with you to get something out of you, but it's like, how as men, how as humans can we genuinely check in with each other and make sure we're on the right track?
Yeah, so powerful, and I couldn't agree more. You talked about people saying, "Really, you?" And I've had friends get in touch with me, or we've been speaking, and they finally have kind of opened up as to their own struggles, and I've said, "Yeah, I've been there. I can relate to that." And then they go, "What, you?" And I go, "Yeah, me." And I think the more of us that can go, "Yeah, me, I'm struggling. I've struggled too, or I'm struggling now." Whatever. The more of us that we can develop that empathy and that openness to talk with each other, and help each other, the better. So absolutely. I mean, you mentioned your dad was a pastor. Is a pastor. Has faith played an important role in your life?
That's an interesting question. Yes, it has. The question I get asked in 2022 most whenever I discuss any sort of Christianity or faith is, well, are you religious, or do you have a faith? And undoubtedly, the cultural experience and the significance that church played in my life growing up has had an impact. On the balance, positive. Not to say without challenges, because you put any group of people together, there's going to be some people who really get it and are pure, and there's going to be other people who are in it for themselves and, you know, have misinterpretations and whatnot. In terms of faith, I believe that if you strip away any religious context or belief, I would say that we have a responsibility to look after each other and treat each other as we would like to be treated ourselves. And regardless of the application in terms of religion, compassion has to be front and center. Has to be front and center, because we're not designed to be alone. We're designed to be in community. And that's where you see things like national pride and tribalism and things that are in essence good, but actually have negative connotations and manifestations. Yeah. So I believe as humans, we're designed to live cooperatively and collaboratively. Unfortunately, in any institution, any group of people, there's going to be people that do that well and people that don't. In terms of faith-based, yeah, I believe that we're here for passion and purpose. You hear me talk about purpose all the time. I believe that we are here to have a positive impact. And that's not, hey, I'm Forbes top whatever. I think it's, if my grave reads good guy, looked after people, I've fulfilled my passion and purpose. So yes, to answer your question, it definitely has shaped me as an individual. As I've matured, and again, I'm speaking now as a 38-year-old, not to say that this doesn't change, you become much more constructively critical, and you start looking at things in terms of, okay, this is really good about that. This is maybe a challenge. And I would love to see the education system teach critical thinking and prioritize it more highly than it currently does. So, when my kids are absorbing things as fact at school, and I'm like, well, actually, that's one way of looking at it, but let's look at how that affected the losers, because it's always the winners that write history. Let's look at the people who were affected negatively in that. Using an example around like the royal family in terms of how that was perceived and how that was taught at school, winners write history. So being able to explain to my children who are dual heritage and the Zambia was a British colony, understanding the impacts of the colonialization of Africa, how that impacts them as an individual and how that impacts my wife's family and history. So critical thinking, I think, is big, and that definitely plays a part in terms of religion as well. But then even going more full circle, it's our responsibility to look at how we interpret what we've been told. It's our personal responsibility to determine how I act upon that stuff and what I take as fact and what I believe is down to interpretation. There you go.
Fantastic to talk or to teach critical thinking within schools, and maybe we'd have better commercial organisations if they kind of accepted critical thinking internally as well. But that's a whole new topic that we could go down.
I don't think we've got time for that one.
No, we haven't. We certainly haven't. As both been victims of having critical thinking, I think we'll leave that for another day.
Probably best.
Now, you've helped and inspired so many people, and you talk about passion and purpose, but you live passion and purpose. I'm fortunate enough to be in your company, going out for breakfast, coffee, whatever, and I see the way that you engage with people, the way that the person on the door, the waiter or waitress, the maitre d', whatever, you look to have. Well, you don't look to have, you just genuinely have. You just give that sense of positiveness, inspiring, helping them, being kind, being generous in how you are with them, that makes them feel wonderful. You see them walk away lifted. I came home and said to Jan when I'd met you last time, just what an effect you have on people. So many people talk about passion and purpose and apply it in a commercial sense, which is, and they'll talk about the company culture and all this kind of nonsense, whereas actually it's just something to write on a board. It's just something to say that we do this. Whereas with you, it is the very essence of who you are. That passion and purpose is within you in every aspect of your life, as I see it, and it's a joy to behold. As I said, you've inspired so many talented people, but who are those that have inspired and helped you become the person you are today?
Firstly, thank you. I think secondly, before I answer that question, that is my dad in terms of why I'm like that. I think when you grow up and your dad occasionally misses birthdays because he's at someone's deathbed, or because there's a drug addict at the doorstep, or there's someone who's going through something, whether that's domestic abuse or whatever, and your dad then says, I can't be with you right now, I have to go and help this individual. When you see that modeled, you can't, and at the time I hated it, but when you see that modeled, like that's the best way that I can operate. Like,
Why did you hate it at the time?
because you obviously as a child you're missing out, and your dad's the guy who talks to people in the lift, and that's awkward. Or like he'll stop on the street and he'll talk to a homeless individual, and you're like, Dad, I just want to go to JD Sports and get some trainers. Like, when you see it modelled, and my mum as well, but certainly my pa, that was modelled. So that's one of the things where, you know, with every parent, they're just trying to do the best that they possibly can. And for one period of time, I was particularly critical of how I was raised and the decisions that they made. But then when you look back at them, they're just humans and they're just doing the best that they can at the time. And that was one thing I know in terms of, for me, is a real core value. And now it's not even, like I say, it's not even an effort. It just is. Sorry, Baba. Getting to a point where that's just part of your behaviour. And I hate the terminology of prince and pauper. You have to talk to everyone the same, because just because I won the genetic geographical lottery, being white male, you know, upper working class, now middle class, whichever way we want to classify it, I won the lottery. So I could be homeless very quickly. I could, you know, have never been blessed to pursue a level of education that has enabled me to open doors. I could be anyone else other than me. And so then if you're talking to someone who's worked in retail because they just lack self-belief, and some people work in retail because they choose to, but then there's others who, might not because they feel limited. Just by you injecting a level of how are you and seeing people, I think seeing people is key. Like, just seeing people as you walk past someone who's homeless, you might not have money in the pocket, but imagine how humiliating it must be, regardless of what you think about them, and how embarrassing they must feel to be there having to beg. Like, that's not a life that anyone has chosen as first topic. So just by you seeing people and saying, hey, good morning, even if you're not giving them something, we owe it to ourselves as humans to look after one another and see everybody and see beyond the task, see beyond the status. And I will talk to a CEO the same way I will talk to someone who's been on the street. There's no fear in terms of, oh, you're Billy Big Balls, I should respect you and call you sir or well, madam or whatever. There's a level of respect, but that same respect is shown to the people who aren't the CEOs too. So I think that's the first thing. In terms of people who have inspired me, I go through real seasons of development. And in the past, I've been quite sporadic in terms of hobbies, where you pick something up, and I'm the sort of person that goes all in. I'm going to wakeboard, and you wakeboard and you love it for a year and then you drop it. I'm going to box, and I box for a year and then I drop it. And then various things that I still love, but sporadic with. In terms of my inspiration, is definitely seasonal. Right now, I'm super inspired by the books that I read, Malcolm Gladwell, super inspired by other small business owners around me, super inspired by anyone who's trying to live outside of the life that they've been prescribed, super inspired by people who love on other people. So I wouldn't say there's individuals as such, or one or two individuals that have stood out as, yeah, they're the people that inspire me. I think it's seasonal, based on the work that I'm doing on myself and the self-awareness, the category that I'm working on at that given time. I'll inevitably then find sources of inspiration who live in that world.
You've shared one of those sources of inspiration with me recently when you gifted me a wonderful book called The Go-Giver by Bob Burg and David Mann. Great book, and I can't recommend it highly enough for anybody that wants to check it out. And we have on the programme what we call the Columbo moment. It's that, as Peter Falk said in that great role of his, what's that one last thing? What's one last thing? That one bit of advice, a tip, some learning that you've been a beneficiary of over the years. What's that one thing now? And I appreciate there'll be so many to choose from, but what one thing would you share with someone listening right now?
That self-awareness leads to self-confidence. Self-awareness leads to self-confidence. I think a lot of people who I talk to are under the impression that if they do a certain thing or they work at a certain place, they're going to become more self-confident. Whereas actually self-confidence comes from self-awareness, knowing what you are, knowing who you are, knowing what you love, what you hate, what your passions are, what your purposes are. That only will enable you to be more comfortable day to day in your own skin. And being comfortable in your own skin allows you to be the most authentic version of yourself every single day. So when you reverse engineer it, self-reflection and self-awareness are the seeds of the tree that becomes authenticity and self-confidence. That would be the thing I would say is most applicable to everybody, because we all have imposter syndrome. We all doubt ourselves. We all feel inferior. We all feel like we're preconditioned to live a life that we believe we're bigger than. And actually creating space for self-awareness is massively important.
Great advice. And I mean, this whole series is about authenticity, about people being able to find their true voice, their true sense of self, that self-awareness. But how does an individual might be sat there thinking, that's okay, but how do I become more self-aware? How do I understand who I am? What journey do I need to go on?
Love that. So the world that we're in now, we are constantly bombarded by bullshit stimuli. Very rarely are we within our own thoughts. So many creatives come to me and they say, my best idea comes when I'm in the shower. And I am not surprised by that at all, because it's the one time in the day where you are left alone with your own thoughts. There's no phone, there's no music, there's no phone calls, there's no scrolling, there's no bullshit content in front of your face. So you are forced to spend time with yourself. So my first point of application would be, well, next time you're on public transport, train, tube, plane, just be the person that's not on the phone with no headphones in. And watch how you allow your mind to wander. And through mind wandering, we find focus. And with focus, we find drive. And with drive, we find the motivation to get up and do something better. So just by reducing the amount of bullshit that you're consuming, and that's everything. Next time you're sat down with a friend or partner, put your fucking phone away. How disrespectful that you think that some random who's posted a picture of a wing or someone who's doing a stupid dance on TikTok is more important than the person in front of you who's wanting to spend time with you. How mad that you think that just by being with your own thoughts, you're the psycho. When you look at people and you're like, that person's not got headphones in. No, that person is probably going to the job that they love, to the job where they think, do you know what, let me just have some mental space. Let me figure out what I need to do today. Let me figure out what I love. Let me become appreciative of the fact that I live in London, which is a place that people spend thousands of pounds to come and visit. And yet you won't even look up and see the incredible landscape. You're looking at your phone. So I know it sounds like I'm bashing social media and tech, but how do we ever expect to get better if we're not comfortable in our own company? Go for a walk. Don't listen to music. Eat your dinner without being on the phone. Watch TV, a documentary, without feeling the need to tweet about it. No one gives a shit. Twitter is basically you walking down the street shouting out your thoughts, not giving a shit if anyone responds. Can you imagine how crazy that would be? I think Southgate should do this. 3 people put their thumbs up. All right, cool. Whereas that same amount of time could be spent, what's the project that I really want to work on? What's the person that I can connect with that's going to help me elevate? What's the thing that I can do to actually elevate myself? And all of it, we are conditioned and kept suppressed. DJ Khaled, crazy guy, but had it right. They don't want you to win. Can you imagine if all the people who were capable of being CEOs and owners were? Can you imagine what that would do to the landscape in terms of ownership and impact and influence and culture? Whereas it's in these people's interest to keep the ants building the nest. So I know that's kind of a long-winded, maybe cynical old man technology approach, but basically what I'm saying is if you spend some time with yourself for a second, you'll realize that you have the capacity to be a fucking superhero.
What a perfect way to end. I just, as I said at the start, being in Jay's company is inspiring. It gives confidence. You can see how him working with so many wonderfully talented people and giving them the confidence to be better people and be better at what they do. It's just inspiring and humbling to be in your company. I love you, man. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
You know, the energy is more than reciprocated. Bless you for having me on. Thank you so much. I'm a fan. So anytime you need me or want me, I'm right here.
Bless you, man. Take care. If you enjoyed the For Real podcast, why don't you like it? Write a 5-star review, subscribe to it, or share it across all your socials. I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.